Everybody should be able to see it. And it's up there. Okay, good. So, yeah, my name is Matthew Keracher, and this paper is about respawning as rapid duration in first-person shooter action game multiplayer contest. And my jumping off point here is that, you know, the driving question for me is like, why are these games so compelling? So why are they so compelling? And if I click the button, here we go. So this is a Halo Reach, which will be my case study, and I play it through the Halo Master Chief Collection on my computer here in the game lab at UWM. I work with a dual monitor kind of thing, and that's going to be important later because on one screen I've got Halo, and then on the other screen I'll have like the essay I'm writing or the things I'm grading or whatever. So already setting up that sort of juxtaposition. So to get right into it, while killing is often centered in commentaries of action in first-person shooters as an expressive act, the kill-death ratio in most multiplayer games is exactly 1. This means that participants are killed as much as they kill, if not more so, as in my case. In considering action games, there is a tendency to focus on the meaning that they communicate about violence through jubilant depictions of war, glorifying militarism, and particularly during the time that I was growing up, their commentary on the war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan. In considering death in video games, Jesper Juhl has considered high-stakes constructions of death as failure, permadeath in roguelikes, etc., as sort of gambling with meaningful emotions. Yet the construction of death and respawning as low stakes, engendering rapid replay, has received less attention. However, the construction of death as rapid respawning is what I'm going to argue makes the experience of action games so compelling. And so the first thing I'm going to go on to is to talk about moving away from textual analysis. And to do that, I'm going to draw a parallel from studies of ritual action in anthropology. So here we go. Edward Schieffelin, writing on Kaluli seance rituals in Papua New Guinea, makes this claim against the sort of the thing that was popular in anthropology at the time, which was symbolic anthropology, that meaning-centered examinations of ritual as text overemphasize the efficacy of symbols to work upon its ritual participants in a rational or intellectual manner. Participation in ritual action is more a matter of symbolic material being produced in specific restrictive ways. You know, for example, singing, where everybody sings the same sort of song, or dance, where everybody is doing sort of rhythmic or pattern bodily movements, than it is about open-ended positive expression. This choreography serves to impose meaning upon the social event by bringing symbols and context into relation with one another within the order of performance. Such approaches overstate the power of symbols to convey information about, comment upon, or formulate some particular state of affairs about the world through their propositional force. The symbolic realm is thus an informationally impoverished one that relies upon the ordering of participation, and this is my input, as a sequence in time to provide the context for its interpretation. So when we shift then to consider games, I'm going to consider analog games first, and then think about what makes digital games different at the end and apply that to Halo Reach, or my experience anyway. So Erving Goffman, writing about action in games, says that the action of games is usually resolved in a single continuous span of time, the same breadth of experience. This provides participants with insight into the consequentiality or fatefulness of their actions. Goffman identifies an example, this example of flipping a coin, 5 phases that constitute the span of play, so heads or tails. There's squaring off, in which we agree to flip the coin and for some stakes. The determination, which is where we let go of our ability to affect the situation and let that coin just rotate in the air. And then disclosure, where you find out whether it's heads or tails, and then we settle the odds. And that for him is a span of play that occurs as a temporal phase. Now, the important thing is this 5th element, which he doesn't really do much to elaborate on, which is the pause. Now, pauses are the period, he says, between plays, and they link individual spans into longer sessions. So what we can infer is that these longer sessions are made up of the temporal units of single play spans. And implicitly, there's then a connection to his conclusion in this piece, where he says that as a result of, well, let me say that, you know, the pause implies you play again, right? And you reflect and go again. And the thing about games is that they readily make available these sequences for us to replay, right? Of course, nothing is ever the same, but nothing is ever radically different within a game as well. And so this affords for gamblers, Goffman says, an ability to perceive the potentialities for chance in situations others would see as devoid of eventfulness. The situation can even be structured so these possibilities are made manifest. So there's something about the temporal span of games and that they can stack into larger sessions, which are made of the same temporal units, that affords a kind of wider outlook onto everyday situations that might reveal more chanceful encounters and different kinds of agencies. So, signpost statement. All right, moving on. So Thomas Malaby has explored ethnographically this idea of through gambling on Crete and the city of Kenya. And I'm going to draw attention to one example about a poker game to reveal something, you know, about analog games, which is different from digital games like Halo Reach, which is procedural time and its functional relationship to social relations. So Malaby asks, what moments of unpredictability reveal about the flow of time and social change? He explores the means by which gamblers make sense of unforeseen outcomes, but as they unfold in the context of a game that they're all structurating together. They're all making the procedural moves to keep the hands moving, to keep everything fair and readable. But then the question is how they make sense of the unforeseen outcomes that come from that stability. As part of everyday experience with significant consequences, gambling games provide, for Malaby, a semi-bounded refraction of the precarious nature of everyday experience, and of point here, a kind of distillation of a chanceful life into a seemingly more apprehensive form. During the span of play, normal conventions are subordinated to those of the game, affording it a bounded quality. All the players share the intent of creating the appropriate conditions for the unpredictable outcomes to unfold. I think I don't really need to go into this part, but Guri is a sort of ethnographic example from Kenya, which, like the English word augur, is a sign or omen of good tidings, an association of good fortune with approximate item, person, or practice. And so Guri is a trope that sort of comes out in the pauses between poker hands in the example, to sort of make sense of the emerging patterns of the outcomes and relate them to concomitant, overlayered, you know, wider spheres of everyday life and social relationships. One particular one is sort of intergenerational tropes, but also the regularity by which people play poker and all of these things. But what I'm interested in here is how we can think of Guri as a trope, but also as an example of how games, as sort of procedures that people all do together, align social relations with the procedural apparatus for creating or accessing duration. So that begs the question, what is duration? What does it mean to say that games offer us access to duration? Well, duration is abstractly and analogously defined as consisting of concrete qualitative multiplicities which divide continuously. You could say that they're the means by which we make patterns, recurring patterns out of experience. One example, a simple example, would be we divide the day into morning, afternoon, and night. These are qualitative multiplicities that we sort of know are different from one another, but they also recur so that today's morning is like tomorrow's morning, but it's also different, whereas morning is also different from afternoon. And this can be sort of put against quantitative multiplicities. So in that same example, a day is 24 hours, and those hours can be divided, you know, and handled in different sorts of ways. Kember and Zelinska write of intuitive knowledge as contact with duration, and they say it's achieved with difficulty, and even then it is fleeting and thus impossible to sustain. A moment of insight that moves theory on or contributes to knowledge, not least by challenging its very foundations. And so what I'm interested in is how these temporal spans in analog games and ritual procedurally order the performance of participants to create contrived forms of duration that afford intuitive knowledge. In other words, we're always looking for intuitive knowledge to sort of make doing it on in the world, but things like games and ritual order our participation together to make that kind of contact with duration more readily available in a contrived form. But then, of course, to go back to the Guri example, those contrived forms then work to create analogies with wider or ongoing social parallels. So the example of procedural action in games and ritual context point to their ability to be used by actors to bring about a seeming contact with duration. Okay, so here's the important thing for the analog games, right? Before I get on to just the finale of the talk with Halo Reach, which is that, to use Roman Jacobson's term of phatic to mean that function of communication in which we know they're still there, hello, maintaining the medium of communication. There's a phatic and functional relationship between the performance of procedural action and bringing about those complex results that we can all sort of enjoy together, and the social relationships between participants. And Malaby is an example of sort of like leaning his foot on somebody's chair, which is a sort of a sort of kind of intimacy normally, but during the game is sort of like, stop doing that, because you're maintaining that boundary, because otherwise there's no game, otherwise there wouldn't be the outcomes for that to happen. But that's not the case with games as 21st century media, as Mark Hansen, who I'm leaning on a little bit here, has to say, because obviously what I'm going to say is that procedural action is maintained by the coded processes of the game. And so there's no longer that functional relationship between the social relationships in the game and the social relationships that make the game. So Hansen marks a distinction between lower order sensibility and higher order perception. And for him, it's like all the stuff comes in and through our senses, and then we make sense of it through higher order modes of thought after the fact, and that's sort of perception, consciousness, etc. The distinctive thing about 21st century media for Hansen is it is marked by a tendency to operate at microtemporal scales without any necessary connection to human sense perception or conscious awareness. So you've got these rapid durations like the 60 frames per second that run the screen or what have you. And he says that there's a gap between our perception of communication technologies and their habitual operations as a result. There's a disconnect there. And we're not really fully aware of the ways in which we're participating. Digital technology has therefore exponentially accelerated sensibility, creating a distinction between those micro scale experiences and the macro scale figures of experience, perception, awareness, like I said. And as a result, deliberation shifts from being an activity that happens at the moment of reception, right, or in the pause between spans of play, to an activity that can only happen in a fundamentally anticipatory mode before any encounter. And this constitutes for Hansen the qualified subordination of the user to 21st century media forms. We are part of the apparatus, we play the game, but in what way does the game play us? And so to return to Halo Reach. Last minute, no problem. So this is my final slide. The examples of procedural time in games and ritual contexts point to a sense of duration that is coeval and fatically driven by participants. This distinguishes the action of first-person shooters from the action of analog games. In real-time games like Halo Reach, there is no longer a functional relationship, so it's sort of like a Radcliffe Brown kind of thing, between maintaining the procedural action of the performance reality and the social relationships between the participants, which, as anybody who's played a game like this will know, because everybody is so rude to each other and just constantly, telling each other to, I don't know, we recognize that trope. The coded procedure of responding engenders the user into a procedural loop that allows no time to pause between plays for sensibility to become perception. And rapid respawning, therefore, intensifies and accelerates the coherence of duration, but orders our participation so that it feeds forward into the next span of play, therefore maximizing the probability that we'll spend more time on device. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So there we go. Yeah, so now I'm gonna get out of here and get back into the.
Okay.